All right. Well, it's always fun to have friends on the podcast, and it's always fun to have relatively new friends that have taught me a lot in the year we've known each other, I'd say.
Mhm.
Jody Weiss, how are you?
Amazing. It's
Yeah.
Friday afternoon and the sun is out. It's cold outside, but it's a beautiful January here in New York City.
Well, I was just going to ask, is your end of Manhattan any warmer than mine? Because I'm
Yeah,
freezing.
it's so cold. I have my down jacket on here. Thank you very much.
It's rough. Yeah, I'm wearing
Yeah,
a wool. It's
yeah,
a wool sweater, and
yeah,
I've got thermal socks on. It's really
yeah,
something.
yeah,
But
yeah.
what a wonderful city we live in, too. It is never a dull moment, and our perception is constantly being challenged, and it's constantly changing. For the stuff that we teach on No Way Out in our Substack, the world of reorientation, I can't think of a better place than Manhattan to really see everything we talk about unfold right before your very eyes.
Right,
So,
right.
have you ever tried explaining to somebody that's not from New York, that's never been to New York? Have you ever tried to explain New York and they just look at you like they don't know?
Yes, people who come and visit and they're like, after 2 or 3 days, they're like, "I think maybe I'll go back home. It's a little too intense here."
It's
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah,
intense.
yeah. You have
Yeah,
to
it's either
be
you love it or you hate it too. I don't think it's
yeah.
really hard to be lukewarm in the middle of the road.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they say us roaches move in and we don't move out. I'm one of those roaches. I was born here. I was born here. I love it. Yeah, can't get enough.
No, it is a hub. It really is a magnet. Both of my parents were born here. I was raised an army brat and then my own military career, but to be here in New York full time it's unlike any other place because again, the scenery is never the same. It's
Never.
constantly changing. So
Yeah,
let's talk about that. So
yeah.
roll the clock back a year ago.
Hmm.
We had Maria Velkova on the show from Tabula Rasa,
Yep.
which was a fund raising money for psychedelic therapies. And
Hmm.
she was talking about, I believe it was MDMA at the time. It was being voted on whether it was going to be
Mm,
approved by the FDA. But anyway, offline, she says, "Hey, you guys, we're going to this dinner meeting," and then lo and behold, I meet you.
there we go.
And
That's
the
the way
next
New
thing you
York.
know, I'm getting invited to all kinds of cool events. I'm meeting all kinds of interesting people
Hmm.
that really tie into a lot of the things that we think about, that Ponch and I think about as it relates to psychedelic therapies for, in our case as veterans,
Hmm.
and a lot of our brothers and sisters that are dealing with very severe PTSD. And so much of our worlds converge. And, in some cases, it's a really unlikely convergence, but it's a really fascinating convergence. And here we are.
Here we are. Here we are. I just feel this is a time in history where consciousness itself is elevating, the conversation around it, the research around it, the transformation in the mental health space, in the
Mm.
way we treat challenging situations, the transformation in the medicines we give, the practices we do. So it's an awesome time to have met you and to learn about your work with veterans. And yeah, it's really the right time to be in this conversation.
It's mind opening and it's really cool. Mind opening, pun intended, I guess.
Yeah.
But it is really cool to see something that actually Ponch, who couldn't be here today, but Ponch was the first person to tell me about psychedelics for therapies for veterans dealing with trauma. And of course, like a lot of people, the first thing out of my mouth was psychedelics. Really, like, I mean, I was a Grateful Dead fan, but I was in the Marine Corps, and like psychedelics, I think of like drugged out people. There's such a negative connotation of psychedelics that the war on drugs has really unleashed on just the word psychedelics, or they think of Haight Asbury, or they think of right here where I am in the West Village in the 60s. But what they're forgetting is that these things have been around for thousands and thousands of years and have extremely valid therapeutic uses.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think we're really beginning to understand that the mind, intellect, and ego are tools,
Mm.
and that in fact our default is this quality of pure present consciousness. It's quite precious. So when the mind stops working, when the intellect stops thinking past and future and subject object experience, when it's just arising experience. It can quiet that negative spinning mind that many soldiers deal with. They deal with images, they deal with
Mm,
negative thinking about what happened in the past. And so there's a particular practice called iREST, IREST, with 20 clinical studies that Dr. Richard Miller has used to quiet the negative spinning of mind. And so most of the VA hospitals across the USA right now use iREST. It's Yoga Nidra. And the studies show, the clinical studies show that when the mind, intellect, and ego stops conversations, mental conversations about the past or the future, or the negative things that happen, and one just sits in that precious quality of themself in the moment, the beauty, the wonder of oneself in the moment, that the stress of post-traumatic stress calms, and this other kind of quality arises
mm.
of preciousness of life in the moment. And so that's why these clinical studies are profound, and that's why the VA hospital teaches iREST in most of the VA centers.
So, wow, so many directions that we could go just with said, I guess we'll bounce around a lot in this conversation, but to see the VA look to do something, not traditional is really promising. Nico Grunman, who we both know, who's been a guest on our show, was talking about how I believe it's 28 or so states at VAs that ketamine IV therapy is now.
Yeah, super exciting. Super
That's
exciting.
really good.
That's the wider lens now. That's the wider aperture of what's happening in the research around consciousness, right? And so there's, neuroscience, quantum physics, all of these modalities are saying that maybe we are not an intellectual process. Maybe we're the arising of experience. Maybe actually consciousness itself is the foundational quality of reality. And then what is the mind, intellect, and ego? And so Dr. David Schwartz, who's a dear friend of mine and a neuroscientist, and I started a podcast called Exploring Reality Maybe, where you can hear it on Apple and Spotify, but we interview neuroscientists and quantum physicists, biologists, plant medicine scientists, psychiatrists, psychologists, shamans, meditators on what is the mind? How does reality arise? From where does it arise? And where does consciousness actually live within the bodies? Because some beings that are not human actually derive consciousness in areas that are not like ears or like eyes, but they're still responsive in a conscious way in their reality. So where does consciousness live? And those are the kind of things we explore in our podcast.
So you may have heard our latest episode that we just released as we're recording today on Friday, January 16th. We just had Dr. Yuval Nuria, and he's the, leading expert on PTSD, and his journey to get to be a clinical psychologist, to get to where he is, started actually in the Yom Kippur War, where he was decorated with the Medal of Valor, which is Israel's equivalent of the Medal of Honor. And what he was saying was that it came down to that soul searching, that like asking bigger questions. Starting with the fact that of the 8 people awarded that decoration in the Yom Kippur War, 4 of them were killed. He was trying to understand that trauma and realize that it was also generational too, that it wasn't just unique to him,
Mm,
that it was generational. Do you think
right?
that I wonder like where that is, like where a lot of the bad connotations of psychedelics even comes from is like just generational trauma. Like you think, if your parents raised you to think that it was hippies, that had psychedelics, you don't want to go into.
Well, I think that, psychedelics, they've been used for thousands of years, and actually shamans use them all throughout their life. They start children on psychedelics at age 4 or 5. By the
Huh.
time they get to be 12 or 13, the psychedelic journey has actually directed that young person on what their life's work is going to be, what their passion is, what their real goal in life is. And so psychedelics are not, quote unquote, damaging. What's damaging has been the war on them since like the mid 50s.
Yeah.
And thank God there's this renaissance of the work around psychedelics with MDMA and stage 3 clinical studies with the whole entire pharmaceutical industry now uniquely focused on psychedelic research with these amazing funds like SGF's fund and others that are investing in psychedelic research. This is an extraordinary time for us to really celebrate that the mind is an expansive kind of a mechanism. And so when the yogi says when the mind, intellect, and ego quiet down, this wider, expansive quality of ourselves
Mm,
emerges.
mhm,
And one can experience a taste of that through psychedelics because it does quiet, or really in its tracks, it changes what the intellect can do. And so there's an ancient book that I teach from called the Vijnana Bhairava. It's a Kashmir Shaivite tradition, and it's tantra. It's non-dual tantra. And these practices in this book also exhaust the intellect, also quiet the mind, so that the habitual quality of the way we perceive reality is disrupted in its path. And that's also what like microdosing and using different types of psychedelics do. It disrupts the habitual mind. And what an amazing time with the MAPS conference, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Research conference, with the studies that are going on now on psychedelics, that actually our mind is a ecstatic, expansive quality of experience
mm.
when the intellect calms down.
Some of the things you said really resonate when we think about
Mm,
Eastern philosophy was a big part of his input that really differentiated him from a lot of other Western strategists. And he started looking at things like Taoism and,
mhm,
Confucianism, that sort of thing. So when you talk about, creating perception and breaking perception, I mean, that's really what he ended up right before he died when he sketched out the OODA loop sketch. It really does come down to how do I understand the projection of reality that I expect to see, and how do I keep challenging that,
mhm,
um, and keeping it aligned to what's actually happening. Dr. Nuria said something like that too, because we were asking him, the way we started the conversation was as fellow military officer veterans, and asking him about, and he was very candid about his experiences in the war in the front lines. And he said very flat out, like, I wasn't suicidal and I wasn't nuts. I kept trying to update my perception of what was happening, knowing that whatever I wanted to see or whatever I thought the way it was supposed to be was probably not what I was seeing, and I had to keep it relevant and match to
mm,
what was happening. And he fought for 12 straight days until he was evacuated. So the amount of presence that, you use the word presence. I mean, the presence that you have to have,
mm.
I think, really hits on that, what you're saying. You
Well,
find
that's
you,
a mm,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's a really incredible point because, our minds are not so well trained. And I call them our minds the wild stallions of the mind, where thoughts go this way and that way, and the horses run around in circles and
Mm,
backwards. And so though we meditate, maybe doing mindfulness or some practice for 20, 30 minutes, actually I call it kind firmness is a practice where we actually, it's like going to the gym. We actually
yeah.
practice not allowing ourselves to think other things and maybe just rest at the bottom of the breath. So it's called ekagrata when you just focus on one thing
Mm,
and you rest on your breath and you just pause at the bottom and it goes up and then you go down and you pause at the bottom. If one can hold that practice for first a minute and then 3 minutes and then 5 minutes and then 20 minutes and then 45 minutes, that is a mastery of kind firmness of the mind. What we as a human race have generally is there's not a strong muscle to be able to control where the mind goes. And so my teacher used to walk for 4 hours at a time up in the Himalayas, just making sure his mind didn't wander. He just rested on that turn of his breath. And so in a modern way to think about this is, where is home base?
mm,
Right? And so I think a lot of the depression and grief and we're experiencing with kids in high school on the internet, the suicide ideation and the higher rates of suicide,
yeah.
even bullying and things like that. There's a lack of understanding that actually our home base is not only our families or friends or neighbors or teachers or whatever, but it's
Mhm.
actually a resting place in our own self where
Mm.
one can go home and rest no matter what the drama is around us. And we teach in the practice that I teach, it's at the bottom, at the pause of the breath. And the reason that is so is that it's a space in between. So there's not a rising, there's not falling, there's not past, there's not future. There's just this gorgeous pause.
Yeah.
And I want to inspire anyone listening who really wants to rest from the fear of what's going on in the world, anxiety about the future or stress about the past, is just to rest
Yeah.
in one's own internal, beautiful, exquisite presence at the bottom of the breath. That's really a
Yeah,
message
because
I want to
nothing's
share.
because nothing's new. No matter how crazy we think the world is getting, it's not new. It's always been like that for thousands and thousands or whatever years. And we think of psychedelics more as medicine versus an illicit drug, like an upper or a down,
Yeah, for sure.
um, that do allow that. Like, when Nico Grunman was on, he was talking about when the therapy starts with the ketamine, that they're able to disconnect things. It's said that a lot of people that have gone through therapeutic use of psychedelics, that's what we're talking about here, that it's like years or decades of therapy just in, one or a couple of treatments.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true.
Peaceful and yeah. Well, now I've done some guided breath work too, and I think that alone, I mean, it is
Mm,
kind of, when you get to learn how to do that and
mhm,
experience that,
mhm,
it really
mhm.
does it does, it's one of those things that does wonders for your body and for your again, learning how to be present. And I think I like what you were saying too, because so many of the world's traditions and faiths and other things point to the fact that things are actually within you. They're within your power.
Mhm.
They're not external of you.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
There's a researcher named Marcus Brantley from Brandon Brantley from Marcus Labs. You can listen to him on our podcast,
Okay.
Exploring Reality, maybe number podcast 17, but he works with people who've had lifelong issues with depression,
Mm.
the kind of depression that cannot respond to medicines and things like that. And Dr. Schwartz and I were just fascinated by his clinical study and research. And what he does is that he maps out the brain, the neurological movement of the brain using various modalities. So it's not
Mm.
just one kind of measurement, it's micro measurements of the way the brain circuits move. And then he applies various solutions depending on the roadblocks or the areas that are too enlivened, whatever the issues are. And what he says to his patients is that whatever you think your life has been, we want you to prepare for after you come home after these 5 days, it won't be the same. So people who could not even leave their house can walk out and feel it's such a transformational thing. And what that says to me is that, our reality is so affected by chemistry.
Yeah.
Life is chemistry, but also the neurological pathways that create fear or fight or flight or etc. And that there's new modalities of science that are actually enabling us to understand the way neurological systems work and the way to enliven areas. Even Cameron, we have a colleague named Cameron Farabus right here in New York who runs the brain research center. He can also map the brain. So there's also these incredible modalities that are being researched now that will transform the way people can deal with these issues if they're feeling stuck.
Hmm. Yeah, it's shattering that correspondence of the reality that you think is real but is not, right?
Shattering it.
Yeah. So you've been at this game a while. I mean, how do you feel about where it's at now? It seems to like, I guess my perception is, or my perspective, it seems that talking about psychedelics in this day and age is not nearly as taboo as it was maybe 25 years ago.
Oh, it's an incredible movement that's going on. A renaissance of psychedelics is out. It's out. Can't get it back in the bag. the clinical studies, ketamine, you can open ketamine clinics now, psilocybin, ayahuasca, all of those things have potentials for research now. The is in stage 3 studies. I feel like, I'm a 50-year meditator. And so I started meditating when I was very young, but ended up in Kashmir when I was 17 and went 8 times over 12 years in my late teens and 20s to study non-dual tantra, to study the arising, the spark, the spark of life that happens this second, the sensual sensory quality of an ecstatic self in the moment. And what I've seen over those years is that meditation started to show up in the churches and in temples and in different ways with mindfulness. And it was taboo at first and underground, and people didn't really do it. And then all of a sudden, mindfulness was in the church. And then Goldie Hawn and her beautiful work with kids in classrooms. Now it's an undeniable understanding that when one can take even 5 minutes a day to be mindful, to meditate on one's breath, to be quiet, the prefrontal cortex enlivens, the
Mm.
higher learning, the higher they can measure it, they can map it out and see over a period of time how this frontal area of higher intuition is enlivened and the fight or flight area calms down. And so it's a physiological transformation meditation. And the research shows it. So where I think we're going now with gatherings like the Center for Consciousness Studies and the Science and Non-Duality summits, where I think we're going now is colleagues are opening up a consciousness research center to really formalize what consciousness is, where does it live, what is the makeup of reality,
Yeah.
and that's where I think we're going with this now.
That's really something. I mean, again, so I guess what I'm gathering is even in like the last, say, quarter century, last 25 years, it's really gone leaps and bounds. Like it
Yeah,
kind of things like depression and things that people need relief from. We've had Norman Ohler on the show twice, and he came on one time to talk about his book Tripped, and he was talking about the history of LSD and how Albert Hoffman intended it to be like a one-time use mental health drug, but it served no value to drug companies or whoever was using it. Whoever wanted to use it to, I don't know, control people or whatever. But it seemed to be, it was actually useful and helpful, and it was making people better.
yeah.
It's so I guess maybe what I'm hearing you also say is that is it fair to say that really the tone has changed so much, it actually gives us a lot of people to be hopeful for, to find healing and find relief from things like depression and PTSD.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Shamans across Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, shamans who really live with this plant medicine really understand it as the teacher. It is the teacher for wisdom, for a higher wisdom, for an elevated sense of oneself. And so the kind of addictions that we deal with, the kind of, whether it's a shopping addiction, work addiction, drug addiction, whatever it is, those hungry ghost qualities of constantly trying to figure out who we are can subside when we understand that the dream is not about something external. The dream is that we are higher consciousness at our core basis when the
Right.
intellect calms down.
You're giving up that higher level of consciousness, that higher inner peace and things like that. So, well, that's a good place, I guess, to seg to what we do now. Like, so what do we do now? One of the things that so kind of how we know each other, is that you've been instrumental in bringing together people from across disciplines and across backgrounds. They, Marine veterans and special needs mothers, doctors that own ketamine clinics, psychiatrists, all kinds of interesting people. Tell us about what we do once a month.
Yeah, lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
So I work at the intersection of consciousness, nature, and capital. Because once we understand that capital is energy and that energy directed as love is the only nutrient we need as a species. And so anything else that is directed not with that lens of sustaining life on earth, of the precious quality of who we are,
Mm,
is not a healthy use of capital. And so I, at that intersection of nature, consciousness, and capital, have a gathering called Women Funding the World for men and women who allocate capital to living systems and to equity. Our nonprofit, the Diversified Capital Coalition, has just done a feasibility study to move the 0.4% of capital that goes to Black and Brown women and 2.3 that go to women to 10% in 10 years by having our colleagues help us solve that problem.
mm,
And we have all sorts of wonderful ways to do that we're going to be implementing. A subgroup, a sub-focus of Women Funding the World is focused on mental and emotional well-being. It's really the
mm,
core of everything. And as a 50-year meditator, as what I call a mystic in the business world, I'm a mystic. I started this podcast with Dr. David Schwartz called Exploring Reality Maybe, where we're really understanding what reality is. And as part of that, we have a monthly gathering called Consciousness Drinks, which
yes.
we are launching in Hudson, New York, in Austin, and other places. And the goal of it really is to nurture the healers, nurture the nurturers who give so much. And so anyone in the healing arts, whether you're a psychiatrist, a psychologist, organizational management, a coach, shaman, yogi, if your day's work is in healing others, we invite you to come and be part of Consciousness Drinks. In that community, we're bringing philanthropists and investors to meet you because we want to fund with that love that I'm talking about.
Hmm.
We want to fund your work. And so that's what Consciousness Drinks is about. We had you were there. We are one of our gatherings. We had Julie Mossbacker, um,
Mossbridge.
Mossbridge talk
Yes.
about
She's
the
also an alumni of our podcast too.
There we go. And that was an incredible conversation. You could not hear, I mean, a pin drop. It was so incredible talking about the telepathy tapes, talking about nonverbal children and how they communicate with each other. And so those are the kind of sort of extraordinary conversations we're having. This month, Dr. Anna Yuzum from the Mind, Body, Spirit Institute, who's a co-host of Consciousness Drinks and who's developing the Yale Center for Mental Health and Spirituality, will be talking and sharing techniques on how to be in connection with each other more intimately in this age of loneliness and isolation. How do we really connect in a more authentic, true, tender way? And so we're very excited about that. And then every month we'll have other speakers
And
join
she's
us as
also an
well.
alumni of the No Way Out podcast.
Yeah, we're just like a
She's
beautiful mirror of each other. I love it.
isn't it neat though? Because
Yeah.
to your point, it's a real connecting event. It happens right here in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I've never been disappointed.
Mm,
Every time I walk out learning or having learned something, in my perspective has really shifted, which I think is part of the intent.
yeah.
We're people that are in these, as you say, the hook that really got me was how do we help uh, brother and sister veterans, because
Mm,
the historical path for healing is, hey, suck it up, tough it up. Here's some drugs, or here's some
mm,
SSRIs, or they could oftentimes turn to um, booze or
mhm,
worse.
mhm,
And in the cases of a lot of people that are, very close to, me personally, and I know to Brian, my co-host, personally, they take their own lives. And
mhm,
and
mhm.
it's the more I've learned about the therapeutic uses of these things, and the more I've met and interacted with people at Consciousness Drinks, it really is fascinating to see, to think, and it does make me sad sometimes. There's a balance between, sad and happy. Sad that I think of a buddy that could have been one trip away from, healing himself, and happy that we're able to get people together and we're able to get the broadcast the message up. So, for example, one of the people that I met at Consciousness Drinks was Dr. Nico Grunman.
Hmm.
I think I don't know if we were recording yet, but we were talking about him earlier, who runs Ember Health here in the city. And Ember Health has done over, I forget the number, 40,000 infusions of IV ketamine treatment. And when he came on the show, he talked about a firefighter that was going to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, I think, and had just come to the end. And they were able to help and help treat him. And we talk about Ember Health, and on this episode, there'll be a plug. This episode is brought to you by Ember Health. That if you are a veteran, or it's not just unique to veterans. He talked about first responders. He talked about 9/11 survivors. He also talked about victims of sexual trauma.
And executives in high level CEOs come to
Yeah,
his clinic.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's all
Hmm.
kinds of different categorizations of people that experience trauma, and that is really amazing because, again, 25 years ago, I don't think you could go to a ketamine clinic legally and be treated here in New York, and now you can. And what was really amazing, and I have to tell you, like, when I got off we stopped recording with Nico, I had to exhale because it was just so amazing to hear, like, the work that he's doing, and two, to think of so many people that I've known who still
Mm.
suffer or who had suffered to the point where they did take their lives,
Hmm.
that this could have been something to help them. And so having a part in creating awareness of that is really a big rise for us. So,
It's
and it came from going to consciousness drinks.
There we go. There we
Yeah.
go. Right? This is the work. This is what's so breathtaking about this work is that, lives that are, I mean, we're not given a handbook when we show up. And so where do we get these tools from? How do we know who to turn to? And
Yeah.
so that's why these conversations, the more public we can get, the more offerings we can offer to turn these problems around, the better. I'm struck by the numbers of young people in junior high and high school, young people who are suffering from
Yeah.
depression and hopelessness. And, I just want to say, if any young person, if you're listening and you know of a young person who's suffering, or if you are a young person who's listening, that really the one thing you can hold on to, that you can rest in when you go to school or to college, whatever, is in that precious quality of your uniqueness.
Yeah.
You're a snowflake. You're a diamond. Nothing is like you. And to rest at the turn of the bottom of your breath without worrying about the past or future is a beautiful practice. The stronger you can get with that, the more you'll get through the rough times.
Isn't it? Boy, I had a really powerful thought when you said that. So often the things that we're wired for or we're programmed for through advertising and other things, they're downers. How many when you watch an NFL game or a pro sporting event, how many alcohol commercials are there? How many commercials are there for pharmaceuticals?
Hmm. Hmm.
What as the journey goes on to continue to learn and understand these therapies and how they help people, it's not to numb you, it's not to bring you down or bring you up. It's actually to bring you present and to help you
Beautiful.
learn and see. Somebody talked about a trip to me and was explaining that a lot of their anxiety or past, I guess, anxiety future, but like past trauma was depixelating, like it was just depixelating, and they were able to get rid of these things and throw them out, um, and get over them rather than be, carry them around like
Right.
lead weights.
Right, right. You ever
Yeah.
see this scene in A Beautiful Mind where Russell Crowe at first has all the young child and that older person in his face, and eventually at the end of the movie, they're just walking in the back towards the side.
Yeah.
And that becomes a mind that's able to move those images that have overtaken them for
Mm,
years, how to, a practice so that those images, they're still there, but they have some quality of mind that doesn't allow them to overtake their space. And meditation can do that. Some of these ketamine, these kind of medicines can calm those down and free a person up from those things that just haunt them.
Dr. Nuria talked with us about being able to forget, not just remember, but also having the power to forget these things, not as denial or not as burying them or avoiding them, but as you say, to have them there without being in your face and dampening your experience in life and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something else.
Yeah, he said a lot on, on our show. He said a lot of really interesting things. He said, the one he hadn't seen research, or he wasn't familiar with the research, I think, on LSD, but he was talking about MDMA and ketamine and psilocybin as, as effective treatments for PTSD, which was good. Another thing that he talked about, and I'm going to introduce you to because he's going to come. He's coming on the show, but he's also going to bring him to consciousness drinks. Is the equine therapy?
Mhm.
So there's psychedelics and there's also horses and I know dogs too have a very
Beautiful, right?
yeah.
Oh my God, dogs are such healing beings. I think their default is ecstatic love, you know? I always
Mm,
think about that. I wanted to suggest this practice. It's a part of the Kashmir Shaivite meditation practice. And so when a person is suffering with an addiction, let's say, whether
mhm,
it's alcohol or cocaine or whatever, that the spark that arises out of nothing is a desire. And so out of nothing comes a desire, right? And then we have the awareness of that. It's yan, it's the knowledge of that, what that desire is. And then there's the action, which is kriya. Oh, I'm going to go get that.
mhm,
And the practice for the yogi is actually to, out of nothing, see that desire arise and try not to even label it of what it is. Man, I've got to get that drink or that food. Just look at it. Just feel it
mm,
arise because it's gorgeous. Out of nothing. Wow, there's a longing. And not put knowledge on it of history and memory and not act on it. And so if our listeners are listening and you're just struggling with a habit that doesn't serve you, the inspiration is that all feelings are allowed, all things that arise are allowed, but to not label it with history and memory and not act on it. Just let the spark arise non-judgmentally and then let it go like a cloud.
yeah.
And so that's part of the practice.
Well, you're wise in the sense that you're able to do this and be conscious of these things within the craziness of our world and the capital of craziness here in Manhattan. I find that when you read things like Thomas Merton, or you read things like, I'm trying to think of another, like what's that book, Lost Horizon, about Shangri-La. You really do tend to want to withdraw. Like you want to disconnect and withdraw, and you say to yourself, "Oh." Thomas Merton said something along the lines of like when he went into the monastery and he had nothing but four corners and a bed and a desk and a book and he had to write, and that was it. That was his freedom. Like he was finally free. And what I'm hearing you say is like you don't have to go into a monastery per se. As crazy as life can get, and it seems like you'd want to do that. People would want to do that. You don't have to do that because there are ways that you can be present now without being dragged down by anxiety of things in the future or trauma from things from the past.
So here's a beautiful practice if
Okay.
our listeners come to New York City. It's one of my favorite things to do. Go down into the subway system where there's talking, there's noise, there's musicians, there's the trains themselves and
Times Square
stand.
might be the best one for that.
There we go. And
Yeah.
close your eyes mostly so you can still see and feel the sounds come into you. Because we think sound just comes in through the ear, but actually sound vibrates through all of your cells. And if one cannot separate, oh, that's a voice or that's a note or that's a train, and just feel a vibrational quality of all the senses triggered in
Mm,
that sound, honestly, identity of, or my identity of Jodiness will dissolve and I'll become a quality of vibration.
mm,
So how does one live in the city? One plays with perception. One
yeah.
plays with one's identity and one plays with the ego. It's actually an amazing playground to disrupt habit, memory, and history. It's an amazing playground, and that's some of the practices that I teach on both the podcast, and we're gonna have classes here and also online. So if you wanna play with reality, I call it melting reality, there's amazing practices to go into a boardroom. How does one go into a boardroom or an investor meeting and not be one's agenda or anxiety and be a trillion cells of vibrating potentiality
Mm.
instead? And what would that feel like? So, yeah,
I mean,
welcome
as
welcome
you,
to
as
the
you,
playground. Welcome to the
well,
playground.
as you describe that, I mean, again, Manhattan, if you're open to it, because I think that you have to be open to it, you have to break. I mean, for us that live here and, it's part of our genetic lineage or whatever, because, I'm not the first generation of my family to be here in Manhattan. If you're open to it, it really does teach that way, I guess. I never thought about the way that you described it, but like, I can't wait to get on I'm going to go straight to Times Square and on my walk from the one to the shuttle. I'm gonna try to absorb all that, when it's really, you've given me really a lot to think about. I was gonna ask you, and this is bringing it sort of to our, not so much, just a lot of them are veterans, but also to our client base, which are executives, which are senior leaders. You'd mentioned how at senior leaders and executives and traders and everybody else, they go to the ketamine clinic too to get treatment for trauma, and they experience trauma from market
Mhm,
swings and
mhm,
blown up books and everything
mhm,
else.
mhm,
Talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot of people that lead companies, that
mhm.
lead teams inside of companies that are listening right now. And what are some of those things that they could be thinking about when it comes to things like consciousness drinks and women flooding
Mm,
the world and
mm.
psychedelic therapies, ketamine?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mark. I think it's a really incredibly important question. These are thought leaders who have huge responsibilities. They have quarterly reports. They have, revenue things they have to meet. They have staffing. It's like a never-ending thing. And so it's actually one of I think the most important things that a leader, a CEO can do for themselves, can give to themselves is a practice throughout the day for 1 minute to disrupt the intellect.
Mm,
It's not 20 minutes after they work out in the morning and then they let the overwhelm of the mind go on and on and on and on throughout the day into the night. It's actually a pause that enables them to sit in their higher intuition, to sit in their sensuality, in their in to sit in all of their senses triggered and just be with their senses. And it's a practice, but it's a gift. It's also a gift to themselves. It's also where creativity comes from and higher intuition. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is I think leaders who know how to delegate and bring teams around them where they're actually flowing throughout the workday instead
mm.
of producing, I think that is a secret sauce. So how does a leader make sure that they've delegated all of the right teams so that they can then intuitively move in and out of different departments in their organization and
Mm.
also show up not as the agenda, not as a to-do list, not as a quarterly reports, but in their heart, in the core of who they are to bring humanity to the journey, to bring love, kindness, genuine caring to the journey of growing that company and its outcome.
Well, you'll meet Punch, but he's the co-author of the flow system, and he would have loved
There
to
we
have
go.
heard what you just said, because teaching flow inside of a company, getting into a state of flow is one of the things that is our
Mhm,
business mission.
mhm,
And again, there's a lot of things that we think differentiate us when we go inside of an organization, but I think being exposed and learning from people like you and Dr. Anna Yusum and Dr. Nico Grunman and others, I mean, it really does do what we're trying to get people to do, and that's broaden their perspectives, because the more perspectives that you have, the better it is for you to make sense of your world, the better for you to make decisions and act and learn inside of that. That's really that's really important. and for leaders, especially, to your point, you point out some really good things like quarterly. I mean, again, having worked in asset management on Wall Street, like the quarterly and the year end, and it's just, and then the crashing and whatever. And you hear all the time of somebody jumping off a skyscraper or jumping in front of a truck on the New Jersey Turnpike or whatever. I mean, there's ways out that don't involve you losing your life. You can look to these sorts of states of mind and free your mind and change your perspective.
There we go.
Yeah. So business, military, what else do we need to cover? Um,
Even family life, relationships, all of those are external. Relationally, they're external. And that's why
mm,
I really champion having a very clear practice on where home base is really.
yeah.
That's the one, if I can leave something with your listener to
Yeah.
really get really well and get solid, is where's home? It might
Mm,
be in your house with your husband or your wife, whatever, but those things can change all the time.
yeah.
Life changes. Nothing is permanent but change. What is the one place that is immovable, that is reliable, that you can count on the same quality when you were 4 and 7 and 15 and 35 and 50? It's this conscious, this present awareness in the core of yourself.
Mm,
That is home.
mm,
And so I really want to inspire listeners just to rest, pause at the bottom of the turn of your breath and call that home and nurture yourself there. There's nothing to do there. There's just to observe. There's nothing to be. There's no past. There's no future. It's a pause. And you can luxuriate in that quality, in that place. But when life externally gets challenging, remember that you have a unchangeable, perfect, it doesn't have to be any different. There's a perfection to it. It's your present awareness in the moment at the turn of the breath.
Once again, we find that we have another guest on No Way Out that knows everything about John Boyd's OODA loop sketch without knowing anything about John Boyd's OODA loop sketch, because that's exactly when you illustrated it and drew it out. That's understanding the difference between the internal and the internal is really where it matters,
Yeah,
because that
there we go.
shapes how you interact with your world. It shapes how you function in it. Beautiful. Okay, so if I'm listening to the No Way Out podcast and I'm reading The World of Reorientation, I am seeing this and I'm hearing about it, I'm reading the article about our conversation here. Where do you want us to send people?
Yes, it would be lovely to have you got all listeners, everyone. Come sign up be a listener on Exploring Reality Maybe podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Visit us on www.exploringrealitymaybe.org, and you can sign up for consciousness drinks there if you're in New York, Austin, upstate New York, and we're working on other locations eventually. And you can reach out to me at Jody at exploringrealitymaybe.com.
Perfect. Oh, and Women Funding the World. Where do we
Women,
go for that?
yeah, you can go to womenfundingtheworld.com, and you can reach out to me at Jody at womenfundingtheworld.com.
Excellent. Well, we're recording on a Friday, and I'm going to see you Tuesday at Consciousness Drinks.
You will.
And a lot of the people that we mentioned will also be there, but I will give you the last word.
Oh my gosh, Mark, just amazing being with you. What a gift you are. You bring light and wisdom to this journey, and it's just a joy to be here with you. And I can't wait to see you on Tuesday.
I can't wait to be on your show too, and I appreciate the invite.
Of course. Of
It's going to be
course.
fun. All
Yep.
right, Jody, we'll knock off the recording, but thanks everybody for listening to No Way Out.